Hello, my name is Dr. Liz Burton-Crow, and I'm the Director of Education for the Carrillo Center for Nonviolence. Welcome back to Living One, our monthly webinar series where presenters from around the world share their vision of a future in which humans and other animals live as one community in peace and wellness. Given all that's unfolded in the past year, these conversations are more important than ever. For they are more than mere conversations. They're opportunities for building community, salve for the isolating wounds of our time. Through Living One, together we attempt to answer the question, we know it's wrong, but what does right look like? This month, we welcome Lierre Keith, who has been a radical feminist for 4 decades and counting. She's the author of 7 books, including The Vegetarian Myth, Food, Justice, and Sustainability, which has been called the most important ecological book of this generation. She is co-author with Derrick, Jensen, and Max Wilbert of Bright Green Lies, How the Environmental Movement Lost Its Way and What We Can Do About It. She lives in Northern California with giant trees and giant dogs. And as a final note, and I'm sure there are some interesting stories about this, Lierre has been arrested 6 times for acts of political resistance. So welcome to Lierre, and interviewing Lierre today is Dr. Gabe Bradshaw, the Executive Director of the Carrillo Center for Nonviolence.
Hi. Only 6?
Only 6.
And counting.
Right.
It's terrific to have you here and kind of back to back with your neighbor, Derrick Jensen, who we had the privilege of having him twice. So maybe we'll drag you back another time as well. Usually what we start off with is kind of, even though we're focused on, visions of the future and discussions and exploration of what does that mean and where are we heading, or where do we want to head? Can you spend a few moments just kind of looking back and giving us a little context in terms of your own evolution and what has brought you to today?
Well, there's 2 kinds of people in the world, right? There's people who live a fairly normal life where, they just have their own trajectory. Maybe they go to school, they learn a trade, they do their thing, maybe they get married. And then there's some point along there they get radicalized. Their eyes are open to things are really bad on this planet right now. And often that's having a child can do that for people. Maybe some beautiful place in their neighborhood is being destroyed by development and they get involved. There's a creature that they love who's under attack suddenly and they realize how bad it is. And then there's this sort of snowballing effect where they become more and more radicalized, right? And they start to question more and more, and they find answers that do help, like explain what's going on. But of course, it's, more grief and more horror. And so that's one trajectory. And then there's the other trajectory, which is people like me where, I don't know, I've always been this way. At 4 years old, I looked out at the world and I thought things are really bad. All I could see was cement everywhere. I wanted trees. I wanted wolves. They were all gone. And I had no idea why humans had done this to the planet. And I wanted to find out because I wanted them back. So for me, it was, just hit the ground running. Like as soon as I was able to read and try to find information, I was on it. I was on that search to try to explain what had gone so terribly wrong. Why were humans doing this? How was all of this stuff connected? And that's what I did. So I'm 57 and I think I have some answers to those questions. I'm not smart enough that I figured it out on my own, but I found a lot of really smart people who had come before me. And, I put it together in my own way, which I guess is what we all do. But I think at this point, the analysis is there, like the understanding of that whole framework is ready. I think it's more of a question is how do we deliver that to people? Because that's going to be the hard moment. But anyway, for me, it was always, I was just compelled by this tremendous biophilic impulse toward living creatures and toward a living planet. And it has just been a tremendous source of grief, as I think everyone here can attest to watch what has happened over our lifetimes to, the last shreds of the wild. And this is it. This is the last moment. So.
Now you said how to deliver it. Can you describe it? Reminds me of Alice in Wonderland, when Dodo says, when I find, no, it's a duck. When I find it, it's usually a frog or a worm. So what is it?
Oh, I wish it was a frog or a worm. That would be wonderful. I think that we have to have a proper diagnosis. We need to understand, where did humans go so wrong? Because, for 2 million years, there was some creature like us on this planet. right? And we weren't monsters and destroyers. We lived inside of, biophilic communities that were lush and dense with life, and we took our nourishment from inside them. We didn't impose ourselves across them. So we didn't turn everything on the planet into more humans. We let the other creatures, and the whole web of life was something that was created great awe in humans. And those were our first religious impulses. And it was about living in balance with those other creatures, especially the knowledge that human hubris is a huge problem. And if humans get out of balance, we can do a tremendous amount of damage to those other creatures. And that is there, like in every ancient tradition that you look for. Every indigenous person knows that. And even some of the, quote, civilized traditions, there's still that core of, don't fly too close to the sun. It's not going to work. You don't have wings. You don't want to do this. Like you can't be gods. You have to be humble before it all. And that's the correct impulse, because we do have these giant brains, and we can, as we see, it can go kind of crazy. So to me, there's like an analysis about, so where did that all go so wrong? Because we seem to have gotten it right for most of our time. Like if all of human history, our entire time on this planet, if that's a football field, it's really just the last 1/3 of a yard that represents civilization. And then it's the last like 1/5 of an inch is industrial civilization. And that's the damage. Like before that, we basically understood how to live in balance. So we're not naturally monsters. We're not naturally destructive to our one and only home. I mean, it wouldn't make any sense if we were. Like, why would evolution create something that was just going to wreck everything? So, I'm not a biological determinist. I don't think that it's human nature to do this. I think there's one specific human pattern that has done this damage, and that's this thing called civilization. So to me, it was a great relief to understand this. It took me quite a while to like find the right people to read and do my own experiments in my garden and all of this, like on my way to understanding what had gone so wrong. It's not, it's not laid out before you. Like you really have to look. The powers that be do not want us to understand this. I'm not sure they get it themselves, but obviously we're not going to get taught this in school. I mean, I remember the day in school when Miss Fox in 4th grade introduced the word civilization. And underneath that, of course, was agriculture, and how wonderful this all was because it was going to relieve all the human suffering. And that, of course, is not true. The moment that you introduce civilization, you've got militarization, you have slavery, you have hierarchical civilizations, human health declines rapidly. Before that, you might have had periodic hunger, like at the end of winter, but everybody goes a little bit hungry, right? With civilization, you honestly have famine where millions of people die on a regular basis, never seen before on the planet. So none of this actually, and of course it's environmentally destructive. It's why we're here. So that, you don't get taught that in school. Like I had to find it. So that's right? Is this analysis of how did we end up here? What has it done to us? What has it done to human culture? And then what has it done to the planet? And then how we might pull back from that. So
you think that's understood? I'm getting 2 messages from you. Do you think it's understood now, in other words?
No. I think there's enough of us who get it that we're out there trying to get people, like we can try to spread this message. That part is, to me, is very exciting because we're not the only ones. It's not just like me and my 5 friends reading a bunch of books that nobody else cares about. Like there's actually, I feel like at least enough of a fledgling movement that we can do something about this. And that part I like, but I mean, there's still not very many of us. And I think the real issue is that, everybody is so attached, right? Everyone is so desperate to have this way of life continue. And that's the hump, is just, we don't want this to be true. We want to believe that there is a way to continue to fuel the destruction of the planet and still have a planet at the end of the day. And there isn't.
Do you think it's important to know why there was this sort of dogleg shift? I mean, not in the sense of the way you listed it, in other words, civilization, agriculture, but I mean, why in particular that last, what was the metric you used? You said the last, 5 inches.
1/5 of an inch. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's the industrial chunk, but the civilization part, yeah. I think
is that important that we, know why this tiny piece went the way it did?
Yeah. And I think there are answers. I don't think this is a mystery anymore. I think that there's been enough archaeology and enough, I mean, I think that the answers are there. I don't think it's actually as, like I remember being in school, right, and learning about the people in the Southwest who, the disappearing people, and they left the cliff dwellings on, and nobody knew why. Well, actually, there's nothing left to we get what happened. It collapsed. Like the last proteins in the cooking pots are human. Like they were reduced to cannibalism because they blew through their topsoil. They took all the trees, destroyed their water supply, and eventually all starved or left and went somewhere else. And that's why the cliff dwellings are there and there's nobody left. And that is the fate of every single civilization. There's been 34 civilizations that we know of, and they all end the same way. And it's not hard to get why. It's because it's overshoot and drawdown. And the reason is because of agriculture. So the moment that you understand what agriculture is, it all falls into place. And that's the thing we're not being told. So I don't mean like in a conspiracy way. It's just nobody cares to look into this except, a bunch of crazy radicals like me who really want to know. And I mean, the answers have been there, honestly, for over 100 years. But it's, most people are very content with the kind of life that industrial civilization provides in rich countries. We can talk about the poor people and what is done to them if you want, but everybody who's a peer essentially who lives in America or England or France or wherever, that's we are quite satisfied with the fact that we have cell phones and computers and cars and all the rest of it, and we think we are dependent on these things, right? When your food comes from the store, you're going to defend that entire economic system that provides that food to that store because you're stuck with it. It's, wherever your basic necessities come from, that feels like life and death because it is. And that's the thing you're going to defend. But if you honestly knew that your food came from the river, you'd defend that river instead. I mean, that just seems basic, right? Like the thing that keeps me alive is the thing I have to protect. It's not like I said, it's not some big conspiracy theory, but most people honestly don't care. So, the question is, at what point are we going to trip that wire where all of our lives are so affected by environmental collapse, topsoil loss, global warming, the aquifers being drained down, all of it. Like, at what point does the ecological crisis hit us on a daily level such that we now realize, oh, our lives are also being threatened by this? That's when most people are going to kick into gear. And my fear is, of course, it's going to be too late by then.
So when you talk about, I think you said 40 or 34, I can't remember, I was a little dyslexic mentally, civilizations,
yeah.
Would you define civilization
Sure.
Psychologically? I mean, is there a way for you, in other words, is there a common denominator from a psychological perspective to define the onset of civilization?
So civilization, just sort of etymologically, it just means people living in cities. That's what civitas is the city. So it's a way of life that's defined by the growth of cities. What that actually means is that people are living in densities that require the importation of resources. And if you think about a city, what is it? Well, it's basically concrete. In an earlier age, it might have been brick or stone. But
what is that psychological shift? Right. In other words, you, for example, at 4, you're right. Looking at concrete and had a visceral understanding of this is not right. So right. the progenitors of these civilizations, what can you describe psychologically? What shifted them from, they did know that their food came from the river, their food came from the land and the animals, you know what I mean? What was the psychological? I don't have an answer. I'm just asking you if you know. Right. Well, is there when you psychological shift? Right. It seems so like if you take you, right, and then let's say you became civilized. That's a radical shift psychologically. And I was wondering if you had any ideas of what that genesis is or where that sprung from.
Well, the thing is, once you have the material base of your culture is based on drawdown, overshoot, and ultimately imperialism, you are going to have a certain psychology. And this is the problem, that even if your religious or spiritual practices are about peace and love and kindness, and all this, it's not going to matter because your way of life is based on imperialism and genocide. So you might be somebody who lives in, with an incredibly split consciousness about that. Like, well, I want everybody to have, love and connection and, based on care and, the kinds of lovely values that we all might like. But you can't, because your way of life means you have to go conquer your neighbors and take their stuff. You've destroyed all yours because you're living in a city. Like, your trees are gone, your water's gone, your fish are gone, your soil's gone for sure. And the only way you're all going to survive is if you go out and conquer the people next to you. And that is literally the history of civilization. Is just you conquer, conquer, conquer. You take all their stuff. You turn all those people into slaves. You're going to have a military to do all that. And and agriculture also provides for the military because it creates this temporary surplus. So now you're going to have an entire class of people whose job is war, which means they get better and better at it, and they can do it full time. And that's why you're always going to win against your neighbors who aren't doing this. You have that temporary advantage. They're not going to have a whole class of people who are dedicated to war. They can't. They're out hunting and gathering and just providing for themselves. They don't have that surplus, and they can't get it unless they destroy their land too. And this has been the problem. So it's this ever snowballing effect across the globe. And then, of course, along came fossil fuel, and the whole thing, it's just over. Now it's everywhere, and we've conquered it all. So that's it. So what happens to transform? You go from people who understand that every single thing is alive, that the entire universe is based on relationship, that you can communicate with every single being, has a way to communicate with you. If you listen, if you're taught how to listen, if you're given the proper ceremonies to be humble and to listen, you can come into relationship with anything that's in the universe. And so it's a very different cosmos about being in right relation. And then you get to agriculture, and that bit by bit, it fades from the culture. It doesn't happen overnight, but by the end, you're going to have dominator male father gods in the sky punishing everybody for doing one wrong thing, who's essentially a psychopath as far as I can tell. And that's it. Like, that's all. That's the only place where sacredness is up above. And then along comes, of course, modern science. They kill him off. Now we've got nothing that's sacred. Mm-hmm. So you're just left with kind of a dead planet, dead relationships, no concept of how you might reconnect to that. And we see, the ever encroaching necropolis of patriarchy. And here we are. So
what is your vision of the future, if you articulate that as an image for quote unquote how we, which could be across species, it doesn't have to be humans, how we live as a kind of a guidepost to be able to make decisions, because the decisions along the way are not going to be necessarily in sync with the principles. Maybe they'll be in sync with the principles, but they may not necessarily be exactly like going, from cars and fast food to this other vision. What is that vision that you have that we should aim toward?
Well, like right now, 200 species go extinct every single day. And like, that would be a great metric. If that just stopped, we'd be so much better. Like, just as a really basic metric, could we stop extincting everybody else on the planet? And I think the figure is 86% of either the primary production or the secondary production. So essentially all the sunlight that falls on the planet, 86% of it goes into humans. Like, nobody rational can think that this is a way of life that can continue.
But how should we, what is your image of how, we can stop doing those things? That's part of it. But what is, once we've done that, like what we say is, we know it's wrong, but what does right look like? Your or someone's or everyday life. What does that look like? Or what are examples of everyday life?
I mean, there have been thousands of cultures across the globe, right, that knew how to live in place and knew how to do that essentially forever. And so I don't think that the question is actually that hard. Like, it's not that difficult to figure out, well, how many people can live here without drawdown? Where I live in Northern California, this town called Crescent City, and it's, the research shows that there really weren't that many fewer people here before the European invasion than there are now, which is kind of interesting. And the reason that that's true here is because of the salmon, because so much food came up these rivers every single year. You could actually have settled villages and a population not that different than what we've got now. People were healthier and happier, and they weren't wrecking the place. I mean, that's the big difference, right? In most places, that's not going to be true. In most places, of course, the population is going to have to decline. And, this is always our choice. We can either let Mother Nature do it for us, and that will not be pretty, or we could just decide to take control of the situation and do it ourselves. And that is, of course, what I would vastly prefer, because that's actually not hard. A lot of people get freaked out when you start talking about, these concepts about population. And I understand why, right? There's been this thing about, population control, which is absolutely top down, is very racist and is terrible for women and girls. And that's not what anybody's talking about. It's not any kind of a model that I would ever suggest. We do know, though, that when we empower women and girls, the population naturally declines. In fact, the number one thing you can do to drop the population rate in any country is really simple. You teach a girl to read. Because when women and girls have even that much more power over their lives, they choose to have fewer children. And the research also shows that it turns out men don't want to have 12 children either, that when you give them access to full health care, i.e. vasectomies, they'll line up around the block for it, because there's no way that they want to have to feed that many dependent mouths. It's too hard.
But when we are introducing, for example, girls to read in places that they don't read, is that a perpetuation, though, of a colonial system? Because essentially it's distancing us from the rest of nature. I mean, it's obviously having a positive impact in what you're talking about, population, and also in terms of agency and eliminating the oppression, the sort of implicit and explicit oppression. But is that an avenue also that ends up kind of perpetuating the system in a certain way?
Yep. I mean, I could see that argument. It's the best thing we've got right now. I've had these discussions before, and nobody can give me a better way. So how would you do that without giving women access to some form of, we can leave women in poverty and let men keep earning all the money in the system, or we can try to raise women up a little bit. We do know that when women have money, they spend it very differently than men, what they call the multiplier effect. Because when you give women money, they make sure that old people are taken care of, that kids go to school, that all the children have food, that people get health care. And when you give men money, they tend to gamble and drink. That's like the main thing they do with extra cash around the world. And what's interesting about, for those of you who know your history, during the Great Depression, when they had the WPA and all these men were put to work doing public projects like bridges and whatnot, they were not paid directly. The government knew that if you just gave men checks, they would waste it. The money was sent home either to their mothers if they weren't married, or to their wives if they were. They were given a stipend, but they weren't directly paid. So we've known this for a long time, that women do things that are life affirming for their communities. And it's no shade on any of the men who are here. You're probably the decent sort who wouldn't do that shit. But we do know that most men have this, for whatever reason, patriarchy does this. It makes men who are not caring human beings, that don't care for their progeny and their communities in the same way that women are really socialized to care about that. And also we have just a stronger biological urge to do that because we are the mothers. And, we know that profound bond that comes from, that huge flood of hormones when women have babies. And that is just an unbreakable bond. And that's true across mammalian life. Like all mothers will protect their children to the death like that. So, you can find a better way. If you've got one, I'm happy to go for it. But we do know right now in this world that if you give girls and women a little more access, they'll get themselves out of these situations. And the birth rate drops very dramatically and very quickly sometimes. And the country that's really strange to look at in this, and very hopeful to me, is Iran, because even though it's, run by a religious theocracy that's very patriarchal, they did realize that their population levels were nothing they could ever sustain, that the birth rate was at the biological maximum and it wasn't going to work. So they actually had this huge, sort of stakeholder meeting where they all tried to put their cards on the table. What can we do about this? What do we know about this? And they had a sustained campaign to try to drop the birth rate. Again, not by using anything that was horrible, that was, going to hurt women or girls, or forcibly do anything to anybody's body, but just giving people the information and raising the status of women and girls. There was a huge campaign to get literacy for women and girls and deliver healthcare across every neighborhood, including the rural neighborhoods, which was kind of a synonymous for birth control. But they had a public relations campaign where they got everybody talking about birth control, which is an interesting thing in a country run by a religious theocracy. But they got all the pop culture people and the media people involved. So you'd have a soap opera, and they would write it into the plot where a young woman's going to get married and her mother says, "Oh, do you know about birth control?" And they'd write it into the story. And then they provided it for free. So anybody who wanted it, if you were married, there's a problem with single people, but you could go and get it. And then they had health educators who went around to the neighborhoods, and it's culturally appropriate. They had women talking to women and men talking to men. They couldn't really mix that up in their country, but they went around and just talked to everybody about this. Like, do you want birth control? We've got it for free. Come and get it. And it worked really, really quickly. The birth rate dropped really dramatically. So so what the average couple actually wanted at the end of the day was like 2.2 children, which is replacement levels. And that's what's interesting is that, if everybody gets what they need in terms of food, shelter, healthcare, education, all of that, our natural impulse for the trajectory of our lives says that both women and men really just want about 2 children. Like, we get that works for the other things that we want to do in our lives, for the other kinds of fulfillment that we might want. That ends up being average. And that's exactly what we need. It's just enough to replace us and not too many more. Because some of us don't want any, and some people really do love having big families, and that's totally fine because it averages out to basically replacement. So, even this like whole concept that, oh, we're just going to keep having children and keep devouring, like, that's not true. It actually takes a tremendous amount of psychological and economic and religious pressure to get everybody to have all those children that they can't provide for, and as it turns out, don't really want. So all we got to do is remove all that. We have to remove all, and that's political. So, I act like, oh, it's so easy. It's not. I mean, we're up against the Catholic Church, for instance, and really all the Abrahamic religions, which are quite powerful across the planet. So we're up against all of that, plus capitalism, because capitalism needs, guess what? Infinite growth. So they always need more consumers. Can't really have that on a finite planet. So all of that's going to have to come down. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's actually that hard to find even still existent cultures that do understand the kind of humility that humans need and the kind of awe and religiosity that shouldn't inhabit our daily lives. When we remember and feel that connection to all the other beings that share this world with us, I don't think it's that hard to want to live that way. We want that. We have that biophilic impulse. I mean, I think that's true for every living creature, that there's a way that being connected to the whole thing just makes us feel so happy. And I see that in my dogs, and I've seen it in my ducks, and I've seen it in bears. Like, at the end of the day, they'll just sit and watch the sunset, just like you and I do, because it's beautiful, right? And we know that the songbird singing helps the flowers open in the morning. Like, there's these biophilic connections between every living creature and every part of the community.
Kind of like our roosters, they definitely help me wake up in the morning.
Wake up, right?
That and my coffee. I wanted to ask you if you knew of a project called Schooling the World.
No, I don't know that one. What are they doing?
Well, it's a project. I don't know its particular status. That they created a documentary called Schooling the World, and I think it's available for free if you look on the internet, like www.schoolingtheworld.org or something. You'll see the documentary, and it's also on YouTube in 7 segments. And they basically it's a quite sobering. It's what you were describing. It's quite sobering in terms of really looking at the education system, at the systematic brainwashing which has been going on for centuries. And it's not just sobering, but I was like awed, like, wow, the progenitors thought like 100 years ahead, how to brainwash people through what we call the education system, which is colonial, and of course did the tremendous destruction, not only of nature, non-human nature, but the indigenous peoples. But one of their themes and efforts has been I don't want to really put a label on it, but in other words, like they were interviewing, I think the women were from Nepal. I can't remember, but the women were I mean, it was like a crush, in a sense. And then there was teaching, and it wasn't written. It wasn't a school. It was just the way of being and living, kind of like it was with me and my grandmother, and certainly from Denmark. I learned how to cook because I did shopping and doing all those things by osmosis. And so that, I don't know any statistics in terms of birth and that, but definitely there was an empowerment, in the framing that you're talking about. There definitely was empowerment among the women. And I don't quite grasp when people call things matrilineal and patrilineal. It seems confused, like when they talk about elephants that way. But anyways, that to me is an alternative, which is also decolonizing. My own personal opinion is that the education system is a rocky and dangerous path. It may succeed in terms of quote unquote elevating women's status, but essentially, and this is my opinion, I see it as just another kind of enslavement and a perpetuation of the system, which is oppressive and brainwashing and disempowering to everyone, in particular, the non-human world. So anyways, that's just one alternative that I know of, and that I was going to suggest might be a path, because I think we're also dealing with the deprivileging of the human species. So that's something. Could you talk about that? In other words, is that an implicit message or theme that you think is critical? You did say humility, with the really, this notion, beautiful description of the bears watching this. I've got to show you this picture of Charlie Russell. Took a picture, he called her a sitting bear, and it was she was a brown bear in Russia, and every night, evening, she'd sit there and look. And I've noticed that with the ground squirrels, who have a sense of aesthetics. So
every single night, my little dog sit there and watch this. She wouldn't go in until the sunset was gone.
Yeah,
she just loved it. It's so beautiful. Like, why not? This is your life. You got to live it, and it's beautiful. And there's no question that animals see beauty, and they know what's beautiful. So
how do we? Anyway. How can you, or describe how you can, how you communicate this notion of the animal aesthetics, and how do we bring that forward in terms of something that is quite central, so that we don't learn from animals that they're teachers so much as it's a subordination or a deprivileging, where we kind of sink into their world and emulate. Is there some way that you communicate that in your work? You certainly talked about it beautifully with your own, your own quote unquote backyard, and the bears and the duck and the birds.
It's got to be there in everyone. There has to be a way to wake it up. If people don't feel it, I know that it's there. I've seen it in tiny little children. I saw it in my own cousins. They lived in this horrible urban just wasteland, and you took them out into trees even for 30 seconds, and they got how wonderful it was. And literally, they did not know the word for tree because they'd never seen one, and I'm not exaggerating. And I took them to trees, and they were just, it was amazing to see. Like, there's that biophilia. Like, they get that trees are wonderful, and sunshine, and all the life inside there, and the way it smells. Like, if you just see them wake up to it, and there has to be a way to do that for the rest of us. It just has to be. And even if we can't get to it in this generation, I don't even know. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe what matters is that we fight for what's left and let the next generation figure out how to make a better way. Because we're just so close to the edge now of, every indicator is in the wrong direction, and those feedback loops are just multiplying. Mm-hmm. So, in some ways, my work is just about how do we stop that? And maybe it's somebody else's job to figure out, how to make people feel better about that. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Well, you've written extensively, and one of your books actually, I think there's still a lot of teaching that, at least your generation, you have to contribute and to guide. I think that everyone needs to participate. So I wouldn't write yourself off. You're not off the hook that easily. But for example, now that science, Jurassic Park, has established and recognizes, and albeit rather reluctantly when it comes to trees and plants and insects and all, that we all have the same, brains. Well, it may be, we all have the same neural capacities.
Yeah.
And we all have those capacities to feel and consciousness. It doesn't matter how you're dressed up, whatever your costume is, whether you're a bumblebee or whether you're an iris or whether you're a salmon or an elephant or a human. So now that is established, sort of collectively, and as you say, there's that natural instinct or this, the biophilia that you speak about. You wrote a book about the vegetarian myth, which was really quite caused a lot of weight. How does that fit in, or can you talk about that? I mean, in other words, because these are the steps, and that is part of the future of how we make decisions. In other words, I mean, and I know this is a tough question because there's specifics and you can't always generalize. But in part of the discussion of, is it right for me to eat my dog, if that's the only source of protein that I think is necessary for me? Or, and again, I know we get into this whole thing about, well, if you're a vegan, you're still killing a sentient plant, you know what I mean? That kind of stuff. But I mean, are there some kinds of guidelines or principles or things that would help people sort this kind of contrary kind of information and ideas to move forward into a very egalitarian and, as you said, peaceful and loving and harmonious earth? Are there some general principles that you have? I mean, you've written so extensively and thought about these things. Are there some sort of guidelines that you can share with people that will help them in their own exploration?
Well, for me, the really bottom line in terms of food is, does it build topsoil? Because if you're destroying soil, you're destroying the world. Mm-hmm. And the planet's been skinned alive at this point. We're out of topsoil and we're eating fossil fuel. So all around the globe, if you test a human body, you will find that almost half of the nitrogen in that human body comes from oil. Mm-hmm. So we're literally eating oil, and it's because we destroyed all the soil and there's nothing left. So if you're building topsoil, you're doing a whole bunch of really important things. Beyond the soil itself, the only way you're going to build it, I mean, is to use perennial. It's a perennial polyculture. So lots and lots of different kinds of plants that have really, really deep roots and live a long time. And those are perennials, very different than annual monocrops, which is what agriculture is. So it's the exact opposite. And of course, animals are part of that. You can't have a biotic community that does not involve animals as well. So all of them are living together long term in some way where there's that give and take and that just constant rejuvenation of the cycle of life. So it depends on all of those creatures doing that together, and that's what makes the whole thing resilient and long lasting. So if you have food that comes from inside that kind of system, you have something that could be sustainable. And that means you're building soil. So that's why that's my metric. If you're building soil, it means that the soil is covered all the time. So it's perennial. Mm-hmm. There's going to be a lot of different kinds of plants. So it's a polyculture, and you've got to have animals in there somewhere because that's where they live. And that's what they do, is they help this whole thing move along. So that's where we should be getting our food. And where I live, that's not hard because I live in a rural area. This is much more difficult if you are somebody who lives in a city. But in, the three things that I like to say are repair, restore, rejoin. So we have to repair what we've destroyed, and that means we have to stop doing agriculture, and we have to let the prairies and the forests come back, and the wetlands especially, but we have to let the natural ecosystems come home because they want to, and they're waiting, and agriculture is a war. It's every single year they have to be pushed back, and if we just stop fighting that war, they will come back. And I've seen it happen on land, piece of land after piece of land. It's not that hard. We just have to stop fighting. We put down the weapon that is the plow, and all of that will come back. Mm-hmm. And then
So those three things, though, let's say, you're talking to people who are urban or don't live in a rural area or have access. Those three, what would you call them?
My metrics: repair, restore, return.
Metrics. Yeah, your three metrics. Those could be used in a sense of, even selecting food at a market.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. You can find all kinds of really great grass-based foods now everywhere. And it's been an extraordinary thing to watch over the last 20 years because it didn't exist. Even 2 decades ago, it wasn't a marketing ploy. Nobody understood it. There were, a few renegades out there really trying it, but now it's everywhere. I mean, even at horrible places like Walmart, you can find it. I can find grass-based butter, and I can find, absolutely not a lie, pasture-raised eggs from hens at Walmart, which is horrifying because I know we all hate Walmart, but in one way it's good because it's there. And it means that there's somewhere enough people got this and understood the principles that it made it all the way into even a store like Walmart. So there is good progress being made. And obviously it's not fast enough, but it is happening. There's enough people fighting for this now who understand these principles. So
just within the last few years, I think there's been incredible change. I mean, really rapid. I mean, as you say, it's not running fast enough, but in the sense of, in an absolute way, that's pretty radical compared to even a few years before.
No, I know, and that's to me, that's like where all the hope is, and I have this essay called "The Girls in the Grasses," and that's it. That's my hope, is the girls in the grasses. So if we can get the grasses back, it's the only way we're going to sequester that carbon. But it's not too late; it can still be done.
And so that essay is on your website.
Yeah, and you can just Google it. You can find it. But yeah.
Is there a kind of a guide, or is that in anything that you've written where you have your three metrics, where someone could bring like you know what I mean? In other words, use that like on a card when they go shopping or something?
Honestly,
like
it's on all my three most famous books are Vegetarian Myth, Deep Green Resistance, and Bright Green Lies. And in all of those books, I discuss this exact thing. So any of those books, you would find it. But honestly, just off the cuff, if you're at the store and you got to buy food and you're nowhere near anything rural, anything that you can find that says grass-based food, it's way better than anything else. Even if they're not doing it perfectly, they're at least doing something toward that. They are building soil, they are sequestering carbon, they're repairing the water table, and providing habitat for all kinds of creatures that would like to come home, and also supporting rural communities, which are under great distress right now. So all of that is what you're doing when you buy that food. And those are all really good things.
So that in itself, I just want to underscore, is a contribution by introducing a concept and a term which was non-existent. Well, maybe it was, but it was obscure. So bringing that into the vernacular is very powerful.
It is, and it's
really in the conversation.
It's just wonderful to watch all this happen. And there's a really great website, which I can tell you about. It's called eatwild.com. And it's this woman, Jo Robinson, who's also written a number of really great books that will walk you through all of what I'm talking about. But you can pick it's just got a big map, and you can pick your state, and then it will show you all the grass-based farms in your area, which is fabulous because you can go there and buy stuff, or you can, they'll tell you where they sell stuff at the farmer's market or at local stores. So you can find all the good stuff. You can buy in bulk if you want for a lot of them. And I think one thing that's important, even if it's hard to do, is a lot of them do tours. So you can go to the farms and see for yourself. You can actually satisfy your own longings for this and make sure with your own eyes that things are doing well. And you'll see perennial cover. You'll see really happy animals. You'll see, fresh running water in the streams. Like all the good stuff is happening there. You'll see all the birds that are living there. Like, you'll see small mammals. You'll see everything that has come back, and and be part of it. Like a lot of times, it's hard work being out there. And if you can volunteer, you'll have a direct relationship with the farm, with the grass, with the soil, with the animals, with the rain and the sun, and your kids will love it. And the farmers can use help. So a lot of them have those kind of work days, and it's a great thing to sign up for and get a more personal relationship to all of it. Is very fulfilling. So I highly recommend that.
I have to say that there's a little bit of a contradiction that I'm picking up on, is that the animals are being raised to be killed and eaten, and they're comparable, just being very conventional, they're comparable in terms of sentience and aspirations and etc. So to me, even the name Eat Wild, if that was the name, I think you said, that's not wild, that's domestication, that's slavery. So I see a real intrinsic contradiction to the idea of us reintegrating into nature as the other animals do.
So there's nothing you can eat that does not involve dead animals. And that was a very, very hard thing for me to come to terms with, but it is the absolute truth. So we have to get over that one, as hard as it is.
Can you clarify? I know there's going to be questions, but what can you give some examples of things that involve dead animals?
So I've talked about the annuals and the perennials. Let's just take a cornfield. So first of all, to get all that corn or wheat or whatever into that field, you had to take over that land. You had to wage war against the native species that lived there, plants and animals, and even bacteria. I mean, this is all the way down to the microorganisms in the soil. So all of that is cleared away. And that's just a long-winded way of saying mass extinction. The reason that we are losing 200 species every single day is because of agriculture, is because humans took that land from other creatures and have continued to take it. So all those animals are dead. And it's not just individuals, it's entire species. That's what's involved in us getting wheat or corn or soy, is mass extinction across the globe. This is not a way of life that is good for animals. You can't take 98% of the old growth forests and 99% of the world's prairies are gone. They're gone. And the reason we took them is so we could do agriculture. So all those plants and animals have nowhere to go, and some of them are gone forever. So there's no way that we can call this like good for animals. So that's number one. Number two, oh gosh, I don't know, how much time you've spent in places like Nebraska or, northern Texas or Iowa, where they do monocrop agriculture like this. So you'll see miles and miles and miles of corn or wheat or soy. So if you've never done this or never been there, talk to somebody who actually harvests at the end of the year, and they will tell you that the last acre is hell, because all of the creatures that have managed to live inside a cornfield, which is some ground-dwelling birds, some small mammals like mice, is pretty much all that can survive there. There's maybe a few amphibians will be there. And as you've plowed through all of the fields, they've got there, it's a smaller and smaller amount of spot for them to hide, and they will all be in that last acre. And the last acre is an utter bloodbath, because all you're doing is chewing them up in the combine. So the estimates are it's about 1,000 small mammals for every acre of corn or wheat or whatever the monocrop is.
But that's not the only alternative. Agriculture, these mass things, is not the only alternative to not killing animals and domesticating animals. There are foragers, for example, the Aborigines, some Aboriginal tribes in Australia are basically vegan. They might kill a whatever they are by foraging, not hunters, but gatherers. Those, I think it's wise to open up the spectrum and to really take into consideration that we're not perpetuating the system that has created, the kind of oppression and suffering that we see today. So
I would be super happy if we just had bison from coast to coast. I would be super happy. That is absolutely my dream, is to restore the Great Plains and have bison and wolves back. And if between now and then we are doing it with cows instead, I don't actually care, because we got to get that carbon down. And if the fastest way to do that is to use cattle instead, that's great. Eventually the place will be filled with bison again, because that's who normally lives there.
But the cows can't. There's a problem with just sliding over use cattle or use bison. That's still a very human oriented and anthropocentric privileged view. And I think that from what you described earlier, the vision that you were describing is that we get away from using, this whole concept of using, that it's more a gift economy. Yes, there are wolves that eat the bison, but I mean, there's a lot in there. And perhaps, I'm asking too much. Well, I'll open it up, because I'm sure people will have very thoughtful questions and would love to have some time with you. But I'll just close with that. I think that a broader view, given our understanding and our appreciation for non-humans, that we move away from this whole concept of use of anyone, whether it's women.
Well, I mean, it's a symbiotic relationship. They're using us too. So I don't mean use like exploit. I just mean they're eating us, we're eating them. And at the end of the day, the soil eats us all. So every one of us plays a role in this cycle. And we have one role to play. It's different than what the role of the ruminant is. Very different. We can't do the things they do. We are utterly dependent on them. I mean, that's why the Plains people call themselves the bison. They are from the bison, because that's who gives them life. And so you have a very humble relationship before the fact that, we can't do those things for ourselves. You and I can't produce oxygen. We can't photosynthesize. We can't digest cellulose. So like all of these steps that create that cycle of life, we only play one little tiny role right here. It's an important role. I mean, we need apex predators too, but we've got to keep them moving. But at the end of the day, we're all
I have to disagree with the term apex, and then I'll stop because there's so many topics that come from the environmental sciences, which are again these projections from a social and political view.
It's only apex in terms of the trophic pyramid. The energy condenses up. That's all.
Well, I'm going to stop because I completely agree with you. I know there's so many people here and they'll have lots better questions and discussions. So thank you so much, Lierre.
What do we got?
Thank you both. And you've left it on a very tantalizing note. So I'm sure that quite a few folks will have things to say either in the chat box, or if you'd like to raise your hand or unmute yourself, feel free to do so. Real quickly, I'm just going to do a quick shameless plug for our next event, which will be December 5th. We're welcoming trauma therapist and former Carullos intern Aaron Johnson. So if you're around, I hope you will join us. So if folks have a question, feel free to unmute yourself. Meanwhile, I mean, I kind of had one that I was percolating on. If you don't mind, I'll jump in, which was sort of harking back to earlier on the conversation. You were talking about, well, and Gay was trying to get to the bottom of some of the psychological aspects of civilization and what impact does that have on psyche. And it really struck me as sort of a feedback loop of hubris, where we're basically, sort of concentrating and seeing ourselves in these cities, right, which is not necessarily quote unquote natural from our hunter-gatherer framework anyway. From that point of view, it's not necessarily natural. So then we're sort of in this echo chamber of our own ideas. We're in our own built environments. And so in a way, we're an echo chamber, even in terms of the architecture around us. And so I'm wondering, sort of where is this, where is it sort of harmful to have, this sort of like this hubris in a vacuum versus like at some point, I feel at least a huge shift that we need to make as a species is to sort of see that we are nature and that we're not necessarily apart from nature. And so then in a way it is sort of like this form of biophilia, but it's like in an unhealthy way. So I don't know. I sort of had all that percolating and I was curious sort of your thoughts on that. If it's necessarily bad to be steeped in our own human built environments, because in a way, if we are nature, aren't they also natural environments in a weird way? So anyway, just
I like the term that Jerry Mander came up with, which was the technosphere, which he contrasts to the biosphere. So we are now living in a world completely surrounded by our own artifacts, and there's nothing else there. And this is how humans go crazy. I mean, we know that schizophrenia is like it's like a way bigger problem in cities than it ever is in rural areas. So we're literally driving ourselves crazy with this. And I mean, also there's nothing long-term that can be sustained here because it requires so much energy and so much destruction that we're out of stuff to use to build these cities now. We've used it all. Like I talked about the topsoil, it's just gone. So what are you even going to feed people once the oil runs out, which it will? The Green Revolution was this horrible mistake. And like Richard Manning says, except for with the one exception of the domestication of wheat, the Green Revolution is the worst thing that's ever happened to the human race. And I think he's absolutely right. So, I mean, we can keep turning more of what's left of nature into these completely human-built environments, but we're going to hit that wall eventually of just utter collapse, this environmental crisis. So we're right up at the edge. So there's just no future in it. It's like they require so much energy to sustain cities. Everything has to be imported from somewhere else. That's the problem. And you lose track of the fact that you are on drawdown because you don't see it. And that's why most hunter-gatherers are really, really good at keeping their populations in check. It's not because they don't like sex. It's because they understand that if you have one more even extra mouth to feed, it means that you're on that downslope now, and there won't be enough deer next year, and there won't be enough fish next year, and there won't be enough berries for everyone. And they get the exact number that everybody, how many productive adults you need to support how many dependent either elders and children, and how much the land can support. And I'm not saying it's fun, but you do know the limits, and everybody gets it, and they play inside the rules, because otherwise you are looking at hunger in a generation or two. But we don't have that automatic feedback anymore. All we know is we go to the store and there's more and more and more. So something really, since there's no feedback loop, it's a negative feedback loop. In fact, like we're getting completely the wrong message from our environment. So unless you're someone who wants to step outside that and take a look at what has potentially gone wrong here, you're just going to keep going with it, like, well, why would I care about this? There's food at the store. It doesn't even cross most people's minds that, we're reaching the end of what is possible here. So we're in the technosphere and we're driving ourselves crazy. Most people aren't even happy. It's half of all Americans have been on antidepressants. So wrecking the world did not actually even make like happy, harmonious people. I don't know that there's anything good to be said for it, honestly. And I get this thing of like, oh, but it's nature because we did it. And it's like, I don't know. I mean, we can debate that. Mm-hmm. If it is nature, all right, fine, it is. But, we don't always do great things. And if everything we do is natural, then all right, then let's just call some of it maybe off limits and try to, kind of cultivate a better way for ourselves, and a culture that supports our, humility and care and compassion and sense of justice, and that just biophilic sort of longing that I do think we all have.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And it occurred to me as you were speaking that, one of the things we do lose out on sort of being in that echo chamber is observing that, not only could we not have, 12 kids or whatever, but the fox or whoever it is out in the field who attempts to have too many kits, we see sort of the consequences of that in the more than human world as well, which can inform us. And we miss out on that when we're sort of writing our own and reading our own stories. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's just those natural cycles in nature. Like, there's more of this species, so then there's more of this species, and then there's fewer, and then there's a collapse, and then it's back up. And, but that's built into evolution. That's built into, all the sort of relationships that depend on each other. And I was just reminded of a story about how, 30 years ago in one of these sites in California, there was, it's devastated by fire, but fire is a part of the community here, right? It's a lot of the species are completely dependent on fire. Their seeds don't burst open unless there's a fire. So there's not any babies unless there's a fire. And one thing that happens is, a lot of the trees fall in the fire, and then there's all this rotting stuff on the ground, but that's incredibly fertile habitat for the next generation of creatures, a lot of whom we can't see, but it's, the biology of the place just absolutely explodes after a fire. And then what you see is the next level of creatures are small insects. So then there's a bumper crop of ants. And then what you see is a bumper crop of bears, because that's one of the things they eat. So it looks like devastation at first, and it is for a little bit, but life comes back really fast. And then, very quickly you have a bumper crop of bears because they're eating the ant grubs as fast as they can out of the fallen trees. And that's just the cycle of the West, right? And so if you were living in this place and actually living in the trees and seeing this every day, and then year after year, and then the wisdom of your elders, you would know that. You would know, okay, there's going to be more bears in a few years because they're going to eat the ants after the fire, which looks terrible, but in fact it's not. And then of course there'd be fewer bears because that's not really sustained. The perennial polyculture comes back. There's going to be grasses probably at first, and then there will be more trees, and then the bear population will decline. But you would get that there was a cycle there, that there was a rhythm to that, and it would be fairly predictable because for thousands of years, your people had seen it, and you would have stories about it, and you would understand the nature of it. So what am I even talking about? Did I answer your question at all?
No, thank you. And I won't hog up any more time because I'm sure there are more questions that anyone else have.
Well, I've got one, if it's okay.
Sure.
Okay. It seems to me that, what's happened is we've reached this implosion point on the human side. And, in terms of trying to recapture any naturalness in our lives, we have to break the patterns that created the catastrophe. And that's all really obvious, but it's so hard to do. And the push is so strong in the other direction that, frankly, I only see probably pockets of return to sort of, I'm kind of old, so I can remember back to the land movements and things like that. So, some of that is happening. I live in the mountains in Colorado. And so people are very environmentally attuned in my community and in the valley that I'm part of. All of which is to say that's great, but I really think that that's not enough to overcome in any kind of way what we're going to be seeing. And the structures are the restraints of whatever a reasonable civilization, or not civilization, but a reasonable community would be, have fallen away. And so I just see chaos coming. I don't know if you have anything to say to that. I apologize. I didn't mean to mansplain or
You're not mansplaining. It's fine.
But I think you see where I'm going.
Well, I mean, I have about 1% hope. I'm 99% sure that this is all we're just F word. I don't have a lot of hope. Okay. So it doesn't matter though. I intend to fight, it's just, as long as there's one tree, I'm fighting for that tree. As long as there's one wolf, or even the possibility of two wolves, I'm going to fight, because that's just my nature. And, we've really been led astray by a lot of even the environmental movement, because for the last, I'd say 20, 25 years, it's all been about what you can do personally in your personal life. And that is in some ways very cynical. There were a whole bunch of PR firms that told them to do that. And they was also in tandem with a bunch of advertising that was done very specifically. And you can read their memos to each other where they say things like, yeah, people will buy products if you basically cast it as green. If you tell a story that this is a wonderful product that is somehow going to save the planet, they will buy that thing, and it relieves them of guilt and anxiety about the state of the planet. They'll feel like they've done something without doing anything, and you get to make money. And that was done very cynically, because that's what capitalism is. I don't even blame these people. It's like, yeah, they got to make money. This is what they're going to do. It's very predictable. But the entire movement got caught up in this. So then you had these books, 25 simple things you can do to save the planet. There are not 25 simple things that anybody can do to save this planet. Okay. These are massive systems of power, and we are going to need massive resistance movements to bring them down. And like the environmental philosopher Kathleen Dean Moore is asked all the time, what can one person do? And she has the best answer, which is, don't be one person. And she's exactly right. We need a resistance movement to this. So it has to start with the correct diagnosis. We have to be willing to name things like civilization, because that's ultimately the problem. This destruction's been going on for 8,000 years. Fossil fuels, absolutely an accelerant, as is capitalism, but those are not the problems. Those are problems on top of the problems. Okay, the real problem is civilization and patriarchy. Those are the two. But these are vast, and they're global, and they've got all the money and all the power and all the weapons. So what are we going to do? And that's why I wrote a book called Deep Green Resistance, because I do have some ideas about that. But we have to face the scale of the problem, the scale of the denial about the problem, And this is a lot to ask of any human being. And that's why we need each other. So even
Right.
if we never get to the point where we have really viable resistance movement, we at least have to have a culture of resistance where we can depend on each other for, I don't know, love, community, connection, support. We can sing songs together. When you're feeling suicidal, you can call me and I can call you. Celebrate with each other too. It's not all just grim out there. There's beauty is every single day. The sun rises. It's amazing to be alive. We can't forget that no matter how grim it gets, right? So we're there to remind each other what we're fighting for. So we have to do that part of it too. We have to have just that kind of affirming, and we keep saying biophilic, but that kind of loving community with each other is the only thing that's going to see us through, because this is the fight of our lives and we're going to have to wage it.
It really is. And I want to thank you for your remarks and just give a shout out to the women in my community. I live in the San Luis Valley in Colorado, and water exporters have tried twice to export the water out of our valley. And women have led the effort to resist that. And we've been successful so far. And we're going to be fighting in the third round coming up again.
It's not going to stop. We are the after dinner snack for civilization. Anything you've got, they're coming for it. This is the thing too. I'm really into all that back to the land stuff. I've got my own little plot here. But I know, this is not resistance. When they want it, they're going to come for it. That has been the fate of every indigenous culture on the planet. It doesn't matter how beautiful it is, how sustainable it is. They don't learn from this. They're not interested in learning from it. They want what you've got, and they're going to come for it. And we all have to get that, how bad it is. Necrophilia, there's no bottom. It's a plug filling a void, filling a void. There's nothing there at the bottom. It's just more desire to kill more life because they enjoy it. That's the social psychology of it. It's bottomless. So
thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Corey, did I see you raise your hand? You're muted, just so you know.
Hi, I just had a question. It was just a thought on the population. Aren't we way past the idea of replacement at this point? I mean, if we just replace, there's just too many.
Right.
I mean, the cities are because we have to live vertically rather than horizontally and stuff.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm definitely not anti-human. I love my species. I really think that the core of us is good. It's just that we've learned the wrong things. But things like this pandemic or things like that, maybe they're not as bad as everybody says. Now, it's easy for me to say because I haven't been obviously directly affected. Someone that I care for hasn't been affected by it. But sort of an overall look, maybe these kind of sort of weeding of the planet may be a very necessary step. What your thoughts?
Well, the problem is that it's going to come whether we want it or not, right? It's completely immaterial what we would hope for the future, that as the systems fail, and they're going to fail, as the electricity fails, as the grid fails, as the sanitation in cities fails, they're going to go back to being population sinks. Cities across time until very, very recently, until modern sanitation, were population sinks, which is to say there were way too many people living in rural areas. You had to have children, many, many children, to do the labor, but then there would be too many once they reached adulthood. So they would be sent into the city. They would either join the army or they would move to the city to try to get a job. And the average life expectancy was 18 months. And I'm not making that up, because the diseases were so bad. So you would get smallpox, or you would get measles, or you would get whatever, dysentery even, and you would die. And that was the end of it. So, I mean, it's totally horrible, right? But that is what the future looks like. And whether we like it or not, this is just reality. I'm not saying I want this. I'm just saying this is where it ends. And this is if we do nothing. So I much prefer the vision where we take control of the problem we all face as adults. And I mean human species, all of us, we together face what we have done, and we start to pull back, which means that most of us have to decide to have 0 or 1 child and be done with it for a while, knowing that in a few generations, we can get back up to 2 if we want, but for now, there's going to be these sacrifices. And we do this so that wolf children and pigeon children and maple tree children and whale children can have some space to live. that we have to withdraw our impact, that we have to, remove ourselves from some of those places and have less impact on the planet and let the other creatures come back. And to me, that is a sacrifice well worth making. I did not have children. I'm not one of these people who hates children. I actually really love children, and I would have loved to have a baby, but I didn't do it. And that was exactly why. There's just too many of us, so I didn't do it. And this is not casting judgment on anybody who did. I hope that you're happy. I'm sure it's a great life, but eventually, all of us are going to have to face this, or we're going to be stuck on the other trajectory where it just ends in petty warlords, Mad Max, horrible diseases, mass starvation. The global warming is coming, and when it's 98 degrees in the Great Plains, the plant growth stops. There's not going to be any food, and it's heading at us now, accelerating every year. So, there are ways out, but we have to face that there's going to be some hardship and sacrifice. And I don't know what else to say. Like I'm doing my best with what life I have to try to get people to understand the nature of the problem, the scale of the problem, what we might do about the problem. But yeah, it's grim. It doesn't have to be grim. It is grim. It is.
So
grim.
where does that education begin? Shouldn't that begin sort of in the schools? Because it's taught now that, we're entitled to have as many children as we want, or to do what we want, or to conquer what we can conquer, because, we're humans and we're the best, supposedly. So we're taught that. So where does that education then?
I mean, it's a whole revision of the entire culture. And I completely agree with what Gay was saying earlier about, the nature of the education system that we have. I don't know if any of you have read John Taylor Gatto's work, but he has this great book called The Underground History of American Education. And the public school system was literally based on the Prussian army, because they wanted to create a population that was controllable and predictable. And they knew the way to do that was to use the military model. And that's what they did. And it's really scary to read how upfront Congress was about this, and the industrialists who wanted, little factory people, essentially, how to turn people into machines. And it's very straightforward what they said about it. And I'm like, okay, well, let's do it. And that's what they did. So here we are. I don't think there's much hope for the kind of public education system, but we can do better for our kids, right? And there just has to be a way for people to withdraw at least some from this system and create better models. And there's a lot of people who do homeschooling and unschooling. Hopefully there's better values that some of them can stumble into and try to have a more biophilic model. I love what I hear about from places like Norway, where they have the forest school, where the kids spend all day running around outside, even in the deep winter. They spend at least part of the day just outside in the trees. And what I would have given for that when I was a kid, just to have that, because they understand that it's necessary for children's development. I don't know how deep they get into that, but they've got to know something about it because they're doing it. So, there's bits of hope here and there, but I don't expect any of it to come through the public education system for sure. I think that's just kind of a done deal. And I don't know. And I get most people can't afford to homeschool their kids. They have to go to work. So now you're stuck with this child that you want more for, and you can't give it to her because you have to go to work 40 hours a week. You've got no choice but to put them in the public school system. And it's just this nasty little vicious circle where I don't know where the hope comes in, but collectively we've got to do better, right? That I do know.
Okay, thank you. I agree.
Sorry.
Austin.
Hi.
Hi, Austin. How are you?
So I'm really well. Thank you for asking.
We know each other, so. She
I
groomed my dog once.
I'm wondering, I'm not really sure what my question is. I'm wondering if you think, is there a plan? Is there a master plan? Is there some person or group of people who thought this up, this necrophilic, weird, destroying kind of mentality? Because I feel you feel like people at our core are not evil. We're not destructive. We would kind of naturally go into a partnership. Have we been led? And what is leading it? Is it even a human entity at the top, or is this I'm just wondering what your thoughts are. Because I've heard that the theory that this is going sort of toward transhumanism, which is like a real dissociation from our bodies and the world. And I kind of think that the self-importance of humans could I don't know what my question is.
Okay,
I'm just wondering if you think there's a master plan.
I don't think there's a master plan. So I'm not going down that path. I do think that there are men especially who are so completely removed from biological life that they have come up with this bizarre idea that we're all going to go live in computers. Now, I will shoot myself before I'm forced to go live in a computer. I also don't think it's possible, because even at the end of the day, somebody has to be there to repair the computers. The computers are going to need some kind of energy source, which means they're going to need all this infrastructure because they need electricity. I mean, they're dreaming. It's not a thing, okay? They want it to be a thing, and that should scare us. It should scare us that there's a whole group of human beings that hate being animals so much that they would rather live inside a set of circuits. I mean, that to me is just utterly grim. I mean, how can you feel anything but pity for these people? Like, don't you have a dog to pet? Is there no tiny child in your life that you can go play ball with? Like, don't you like sex? Do you food? Like, is there something that gives you joy? There's got to be something. And I don't know, are they that dead inside that sounds like that's their utopia, is that we're going to go live in computers? There's no way they're going to make that happen. So I know that it gets scary in the middle of the night when you think about how crazy this all is, but there's no way that can happen, because the computers aren't going to repair the computers, and that the computers aren't going to generate the electricity. Like, it needs infrastructure out here.
So it's basically industrial civilization creating commercials for industrial civilization, creating products for industrial civilization. It's not actually a human intent at the beginning of all of this destruction. It's more like,
I mean, you can go back and read Lewis Mumford, for instance, because already in the 1960s, he's saying this entire system is honestly, it's for machines. It's machines getting us to build more machines. And they're the ones who have won. Like, we are now dedicating our lives to being part of this huge machine that just makes more machines and does not actually produce anything for humans. And he was quite aware that it was killing the planet, and that he said life as a whole may not survive. He already saw that. So I highly recommend, his famous article is The Authoritarian and Democratic Techniques, which is basically all of his work condensed to a fairly sizable, a short article that anybody, is a small bite, you can do it. His books are bigger, a little harder, not as engaging, but that article is the one. And he's already on it.
I'm familiar with that. I love it. I'm familiar with that, and I love it.
And it's really good. He absolutely lays it out. And this is what we've done. We've let the machines take over, and it's now the machines. And he talks about civilization as that's the very beginning of this, not even industrial, but just regular civilization, that it created the mega machine. And at first, the mega machine was just humans and draft animals in the service of this hierarchy that had, the king on top, the military next, and then you've got everybody else on the bottom. And this is all done in the service of what? And that's like always the question of what? And it's just to make the thing perpetuate itself, because nobody's happy inside this thing except, well, maybe the king, but who knows? I'm not sure those people were even particularly happy. They don't seem happy when you read their histories, but like, who knows? It doesn't matter. The point of it really was just that it keeps perpetuating itself, and that once it's set in motion, how do you stop it? Because every piece is just keeping the other piece going, right?
Yeah,
so
and then
it doesn't need
police and the people in power are there to protect the machine. Basically, now the police are basically representing the machine. And so when we fight back, we get arrested by the machine, and it's not like a real person we can rationalize with. It's like we're not resisting against anything rational. So there's really no nonviolent way to go about the stopping of it.
We could. I mean, this is the thing about nonviolence. It's an incredibly elegant political technique. And if we had enough people, we could shut this party down by midnight. The problem is I don't see the people, because we'd need millions of people to say enough is enough. We're not doing this. They only have power because we give it to them. I mean, that's the real insight about the nature of political power. The people on top only have it because we grant it to them. And they force us to submit sometimes. Like, the threat of violence is always there, and we all know it. But the reason they have power is because we consent. And if we withdraw our consent, they won't have it anymore. So if enough of us stood up and said, no, we're not letting you take the last drops of oil. We're not letting you drive the last species extinct. We're not letting you put screens in front of all our 2-year-olds so they're addicted to cell phones before they're 3. All of it, just put all of it together. We're not doing it anymore. We could bring it to a halt. They have nothing without us consenting. So all we have to do is withdraw consent. Now, that sounds simple, but of course it's not, because millions of us would have to do it. And that's my problem, is I don't see the millions. That's what it would take. 20 of us aren't going to do it, but millions could. But I don't know. Are they going to do it, or are we all just going to die? I mean, we're getting to that point now where everybody's personal life is going to be affected by things like global warming. It's already happening, right? So I don't know. Are we going to rise up or not? And if we don't, what then? Well, that's why I wrote a book called Deep Green Resistance, because if we don't, there is another plan. Might not work either, but might be worth a try. At least we put it on the table. Let's talk about it. So that's where we are, Austin. I don't know. You got to come visit again.
I saw a couple threads kind of come together as you were speaking, just having to do with sort of the arrested development of our culture. And it's almost as if we're sort of stuck in adolescence. And
Yes, right.
what I'm thinking of is, earlier in the talk, you were talking about how we needed to, do the hard work and sort of face what's actually happening. And then even talking about, the singularity and this whole idea of sort of living in outer space and circuitry and all of that. That just strikes me as another, sort of layer of that in terms of the denial of death, right? Because from what I do know about Ray Kurzweil, the guy who's sort of the progenitor of this idea that we'll all live in machines forever, in his biography, he talks about the idea coming from the dream where he had his deceased parents in some room, but he couldn't find them or something like that. And so it all kind of comes back to this guy's sort of like fear of abandonment and denial of death. And so, yeah, I don't know if that's a question so much as an observation that, I think that may be at the heart of it. And there is this group of indigenous folks. I can't remember the tribe's name, but I know that they were in the equatorial rainforest and, right at the top of South America. And they talk about us as the younger brothers.
Oh, yeah, we're younger brother and they're older brother.
Yeah, and they're the elder brothers.
Yeah.
And I mean, I definitely had that come up a few times as you were speaking as well, because it really just strikes me as, sort of almost seeing ourselves from the outside in, where you have sort of this maybe like young, destructive sibling who's a drug addict, essentially, as we were addicted to all of our technologies and the resources that come with those. And so, just how that looks not only to the indigenous elders, but also to the planet herself in terms of, what do you do with that when you have sort of like an uncontrolled teen or whatever that's in like the throes of addiction and just totally destructive? But anyway, I just wanted to share that.
Well, we're going to have to get control at some point. I mean, the thing about addiction is that, eventually if the addict bottoms out, there's hope. The problem is with this culture is that it's not the addict that's getting hurt. It's everybody else. Like everybody else is going to die because the addict can't get control of it. So that's the problem, right? If only the addict was the one getting hurt, it might help. But and this is Mist, by the way.
Yeah,
She was my very first dog.
Great Pyrenees addictions are probably healthier than.
I know, right? Yeah, I'm totally addicted to my doggos. There's no question about that. But yeah, and I mean, we've got I don't know. I just keep thinking about all these kids that I see all the time now with the devices, like there's like this whole new level of arrested development coming down the pike. And, I've read a few studies about this where these teachers of nursery school, kindergarten, really young kids, they're coming to school and they are observably, they're not just missing fine motor skills, like using scissors and stuff that they should have by now, but gross motor skills. So we're talking about 4-year-olds who don't know how to climb, kick a ball, throw a ball, skip, do a somersault. They can walk and that's about it. And they're so far behind developmentally because they've been put in front of screens their whole lives.
Mm-hmm. People are getting bone spurs in the back of their head from looking down at screens. So it's literally changing the shape of our skeletons.
And people are letting this happen to their children. Like you'd think when their children were involved that at least at that point they'd pull back. But I mean, we saw with the introduction of television that was not a thing already. That
Oh, there's so much pressure, though.
Well,
the
it
whole
is
society.
culture in as television is introduced, what you see is a
Mhm.
wave of teen suicide. That first generation of kids who have television, it doesn't go well for them. And Jerry Manor talked about this in his first book about how it just destroys human capacity for imagination. And what that means is, as you're a teenager and life gets hard, because it does for all teens, no matter how good your life is, it's not fun being a teenager. In previous generations, you could imagine your way out of it. You had the capacity to think, all right, well, I can dream of this other wonderful world where I might be when I'm 30. You know, perhaps I'll move to Paris and become a poet, or I will be in the NFL and I'll have the final touchdown, or like you could, whatever, however crazy it was, you had a way to imagine that there was a better world and you could live inside that fantasy to get you through the hard times. And you introduce television and kids learn, they lose that capacity immediately. So now you have the wave of teen suicides. And that was observed in culture after culture after culture. And it didn't stop people from, nobody was able to say no to it. And that's the problem with these technologies, is they're absolutely totalizing and they're addictive. And it's the machine just rolling over all of us. And even if you as an individual were able to pull your kid out of it and not have a television, I mean, good on you if you did that, but your child's peers are that messed up from all of it. So is very hard.
Mm-hmm. Amen. Did anyone have any final thoughts or questions?
Well, just is there, I wish there was a secret way or what, but if we're going to talk about it, it won't be a secret. But anyway, I wish there was a way to monkey wrench this in the old way and have some impact, okay?
Yeah.
Because it becomes, it's so interrelated that even if we succeeded in reducing the harm in one part, it seems that another part would gobble it up some other way, sort of. And I know that sounds like he should be more hopeful, but because I would do it. I come from a long history of resistance going back to the 60s. So,
well, you might enjoy our book, Deep Green Resistance, because that's basically what we talk about. So
right.
It would have to be sustained and it would have to be on a continent-wide scale. It could be done theoretically.
Yeah.
Is anybody going to do it? I don't know. I mean, it would take people with a very specific kind of training, and they would have to follow that kind of model.
Right.
I mean, they did it in Nigeria and they drove out some of the oil companies. So I use MEND as a sort of a template for that, because I don't agree with everything they did, but when they went after the oil companies, they were able to drive some of the big ones right out of their land. And that's what they said: leave our land or you will die in it. And they meant it. So they were able to do it, at least partially. And it didn't, there were maybe 500 of them, well-trained with speedboats, were able to do those kinds of attacks on infrastructure and make a dent. So what if we all said that? And what if we all did that? I think it's possible, and I think it's worth considering. I don't know. I don't know if anyone will do it, and I also don't know that it will work. But I think it's at least worth putting on the table, because the situation is rather desperate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there have been examples of that where they, as nonviolent protest, disabled pumping stations and things like that for oil and whatnot. And of course,
go either way. Yep.
Standing Rock and
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
I see we have two hands up. I'm not sure whose went up first. Anne, did you want to go ahead and go first?
Gay's hand up first.
Looks like Anne, if you can unmute yourself, we can't hear you currently if you are talking. So maybe Anne needs a moment. Joy, do you mind going first?
No, I don't mind going first. And I'm sorry I can't come on my camera right now, but I just wanted to touch on a point that Lierre made earlier, and I wanted to clarify to make sure I understood that the number one thing we can do in terms of not population control, but minimizing how much we're reproducing is to teach girls how to read. Is that something that is like a pointed effort? Is there like a connection made there that anyone is? I mean, I know there's programs to teach girls to read, but I don't know. It just feels like, oh, okay, so feminism is is how one of the key strategies, right? Of how
it is, because you have to raise the status of women. That has to be done. And it's the only thing that drops the population. Is when women and girls get at least some power over their lives. And they've found that is the flex point, is that if girls and women stay in school a tiny bit longer, learn to read, that they have way more choices in their lives about what to do. And they will use that to improve themselves, to get into a better situation. And ultimately they can then choose to have fewer children. So this has been studied for decades, and that is the point. That's like, boom, if it's like it's like a binary, basically. If they learn to read, way better things can happen for women and girls. So, yeah. But yes, I mean, it's even the Harvard School of Public Health says that male-dominated societies are the worst threat to life on the planet. It's pretty much a direct quote, because we see what they do. So we're all going to have to be feminists. Oh gosh, what a shame. And we can make the argument from self-interest, like, well, this is the only way we're going to save ourselves. And then there's also the argument from justice, which is, well, we need to be doing it anyway because women and girls count. So these are all things we should be doing anyway. And that's great. Either way, it has to get done. So
awesome. Thank you,
Joy.
Anne, did you have?
Yeah. Hi. Thanks. Just real quick. Hi. Thanks for doing this. This is really great, you all. The question is, if you could repeat the name of the book you spoke of earlier about the history of education being modeled after the Roman art. Yeah.
Yes, it's a very good book. It's called The Underground History of American Education. And the man's name is John Taylor Gatto. It's spelled Gatto. He has other books too, which are quite wonderful, but that's like his opus. The thing is huge, and it'll just walk you through, and by the time you're done, you're like, this explains every single reason I hated public school. It's all right here. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
It's a great book. He's not gotten anywhere near the kind of, I think, the audience he should have. I don't honestly know if he's still alive. He may have died at some point in the last decade or two, and he was a teacher. That's how he came to all of this. And he was actually voted like Teacher of the Year for the state of New York one year. That's how much his students loved him. But he realized that he was mostly just hurting them by making them participate in the system. And you get to hear all these stories of what he did when they were teenagers. He'd be like, if you can find something better to do that looks like a future, I will just sign you out every single day and pretend you're here. And some of these kids went out and did great things. Like they developed all kinds of businesses, and they joined their family businesses, and they started cafes, and they started all kinds of, they did amazing, became musicians, and just did amazing things, like what teenagers should be doing, not just sitting at a desk. And he was like, yep, I'm just subversive. You guys need lives. I'm going to let you have them. And he trusted them to just go out in the world and make their way. A lot of them did. So it's just really cool reading those stories. And he clearly really cares about young people. So he wrote this whole book about it.
Great. I'm going to repeat the underground history of the American
education.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd like to interject also Schooling the World. And I don't know if you were here, but look that up.
Okay.
It really is. It's very similar, but I guess the difference would be that it's looking at more of an indigenous and decolonization as the alternative, or as a deconstructive approach, and not feeding into the education system.
And Schooling the World is a film.
It's
correct?
a film,
It's
a film also, and it's a nonprofit. I don't know. I haven't kept up with them, but it was a nonprofit that was formed.
I believe you
Okay,
can
so
find,
that's not a book.
No.
You can find parts on YouTube, I believe,
Okay.
where I've seen
Yeah.
some clips, but I think it's like a mini series kind of thing because I remember it being kind of long if you did it all in one go.
I think now they have the entire documentary. It is on YouTube split up, but I think they have the entire documentary on the internet that's free.
Okay, great.
If you keep talking, I'll look at.
Okay.
Awesome. Any last sort of thoughts or questions?
I'll ask one last one, and maybe unless someone wants to make a comment or ask another question, which we're happy to entertain. Are you working on a new book, Lierre?
Oh, I'm trying. It's, like everybody else, I have to earn a living. So I don't have the time to write that I wish I did. But yes, there's always future projects for sure.
That's exciting. And we'll keep our eyes peeled for, in the next however long it takes.
Yeah, however long it
No pressure on that in that regard. Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you, Lierre, so much for taking
sure.
time out of your weekend.
Good.
And sharing your vision. A lot of food for thought. I'm still chewing on. So thank you all. And we do hope we'll see you next time, December 5th. And otherwise, I hope you all have a great rest of your weekend.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks so much,
Bye.
Lierre. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.